G converted man here. Oh, my word! This tweet. Ah. All right, so this tweet, so just it's one of those things that just irritates you, and you have to say something about it. You know, I mean, well, you don't have to say something about it, but you know, you want to say something. Anyways, doesn't matter. Whatever. So S.J. Thompson retweets this thing from Eric, who's replying to somebody else. This person saying, provide sufficient evidence that there is no sufficient evidence for the existence of God. Go for it. #atheism. And then a giant quote from an atheist philosopher. Okay, well, I guess I'll read that, and then we'll go over this, the problem with everything here. Okay, and just like reasonableness depends on so many subjective factors, evidence is not a clean, objective, logical notion. It's not that people who disagree with you have no evidence at all. What do you think you were the first person to see the singular, unambiguous phenomenon in the world because you're so much smarter than all of them? And you were the first 15-year-old to think that everybody is a conformist too, weren't you? Evidence, for the most part, is what a person takes to be. Evidence doesn't just exist out there on its own. Some phenomenon only become evidence in virtue of being taken to be indicative of some conclusion by some person. And obviously, different people can take the same phenomenon as evidence to contradictory conclusions. Or they can appear to be observing the very same phenomenon, but they're actually taking note of very different details and drawing the same or different conclusions from it. We've discovered that there are better and worse ways to gather and evaluate evidence, but it's not when they draw a mistaken conclusion or one you don't like that they have no evidence at all. What you disagree with them about is what evidence is relevant and how best to evaluate it. So atheists need to get out of the habit of dismissing all believers as having no evidence at all. The believers don't see themselves that way, and you don't just come off as dogmatic and irrational for saying it about them. Wouldn't you think it was laughable if they said about you, well, he's got no evidence and no reasons at all for what he believes? Dr. Matthew McCormick, atheist philosopher. Okay. Excuse me. Okay, so let's start with the logical fallacies of what Eric has said here. Provide sufficient evidence that there is no sufficient evidence for the existence of God. Shifting the burden of proof comes to mind. Failure of providing the burden of proof. Misunderstanding and or not, this is more of a formal fallacy, not really understanding how proof works. Proving a negative, well, I should say proving a universal negative is nigh impossible. It might, well, technically you can sort of do it, but it's very difficult. You can argue against a universal negative, but proof in this context would be within logical proof of a negative is sometimes possible, but against a universal negative is, I would dare say impossible, though it might be possible for some universal negatives, so it depends. So evidence that there's no evidence, or wait, evidence that there is no sufficient evidence. I like how we added something to evidence. No, we didn't. I'm sorry. Sufficient evidence. There's no sufficient evidence. Well, why not just evidence? I mean, what would make it sufficient? So, I mean, the whole quote here is talking about evidence. So, why put in sufficient evidence since you're basing this off of a quote, I guess. So, is there no sufficient evidence for the existence of God? Well, again, this goes against the entire quote that you're posting. So it's like, hey, here's this quote that's from an atheist that I think supports my position, but it doesn't actually support my position at all in any way, shape, or form. But here you go, read this. It's from an atheist. See? Haha. So obviously, to me, Eric maybe has read this, but doesn't comprehend why it doesn't support his position. So the philosopher is saying, let's stop saying that theists don't have evidence for God. They have bad evidence for God, or, the evidence that they're looking at is they're interpreting it the wrong way or whatever. But it's not like they have no evidence. Now, I disagree with the philosopher, but that's not really relevant right now. What's relevant is he's saying, let's not say that there is no evidence. Let's just say that the evidence is bad, or that, that they're looking at it the wrong way, or, they're looking at the same thing that we are, but interpreting it differently, or they're not using the same system that we're using, or whatever. So if he's arguing using this philosopher, then this philosopher wouldn't say that there is no sufficient evidence or evidence for God. It would simply say that, yeah, the same evidence that you point to and say that means God, I point to and say that means no God. Like the exact same phenomenon that we both point at. We could both say that's God and that's not God simultaneously. So if you were to argue against this philosopher, he might, I mean, I don't know how he would respond, or if he can respond, if he's alive or not, I don't know. But he might say something like that because, you depending on what theist you talk to, you hear different things like, the existence itself is proof of God. Well, how is existence proof of anything except for existence? How does that lead to God? Where's the association causation there? How is that proof of anything other than itself? And so you point to existence and say God, and I point to existence and say existence. So it's not that there's no sufficient evidence for the existence of what you call God, because you're pointing at reality itself and saying that's the evidence of God. And I'm pointing reality itself and saying, no, that's the evidence of reality itself. Now help me point at God. There's two different things here. Oh, well, but you can't point at God like you can point at reality. Okay, well then, if God's not in reality, then it's not real, right? If you can't point at it, that's already a problem of some sort. Well, God's not the sort of thing you can point at. Okay, well then, you're already making God into a different category, right? So the logical errors of providing this sufficient evidence that there's no sufficient evidence, of shifting the burden of proof, failure to provide burden of proof, and so on, are almost irrelevant in light of the fact that the entire quote is actually saying, no, there is evidence, but it's just different evidence, or it's the same. We're looking at the same thing, but we're not looking at it in the same way. The door opens on its own, and I say, oh, that's evidence of a ghost. And you say, no. That's not evidence of a ghost, because I need evidence that there's a ghost in the first place. And you say, well, but a ghost could open the door, and you go down this rabbit hole of, what a ghost could or couldn't do. And you're avoiding proving that there's a ghost. You're just asserting that the ghost is there. So provide sufficient evidence that there's no sufficient evidence for the ghost. Well, the evidence of the ghost that I submitted was that the door opened. So the door opening is not sufficient evidence of the ghost. And that's the point. The point is that the evidence that you think supports God doesn't support God, using the philosopher's own quote, Eric and S.J. Thompson, in case they decide to ever listen to this or care about what I say anymore. I don't know. I'd love to talk to them again, but we'll see if that happens. Okay, so I disagree with this philosopher on pretty much everything he said. Kind of, in some way. I mean, I get what he's aiming at, but I kind of disagree with how he put it out there, I guess. I would say it a different way, I guess. I'd say that evidence to be evidence already is something that I'm putting into some sort of structure where I'm deducing things about the thing that I think that I'm seeing. Okay, I don't know if I can explain that right, but there's certain procedures, and you think of a crime scene or where there's forensic evidence, so you have to be meticulously careful about not contaminating the crime scene. So you go in there with the way that will assure that the scene is pristine. So maybe you reach over with a camera in your hand to examine the ground so that you don't step on it at all. Well, of course, now you might have some dust on the camera that falls down. So so you take a precaution, you glove your hand and you clean the camera and you wrap the camera in a bag or whatever, and then you reach over it. Well, you've still caused some wind maybe, but I mean, you did everything you could to negate there being a huge impact on the scene. So, maybe you just put a telescope, attach that to your camera so that you can see it from a distance so that you don't affect the scene at all, although you've affected it at a quantum level because you observed it. No. Yeah. But you take all those precautions, and so then you record the data. See, that's the system that you're using to gather the evidence, and then you take whatever has been gathered, and you look at it, and you go, okay, well, what am I seeing here? Is this a fingerprint, or is it, something else? Well, it might look like a fingerprint, but maybe it is just a random imprint of an object that happens to look like a fingerprint. But the likelihood of that, given the place that it was found, is so remotely high that it becomes probabilistic that that's not an option. But the more you learn about the situation, the more the story unfolds as to the probability of the thing happening in a certain way being true. So that requires more evidence. It's not just one piece, but several pieces that would lead you to a conclusion about who the culprit is and that did the crime. Now, of course, it's not you working alone, but it's many people working on the same thing and then examining what you looked at. So you look at it, your team looks at it and goes through it, and some other team looks at it and goes through it, and then the two of you can see if you got to the same conclusion. And if you did, well, then there's something there, maybe. But if you didn't, well, then maybe there's some things you have to re-examine. And that's basically the scientific process, essentially. So when you say, okay, there's evidence for God, well, what evidence are you talking about? Because in order to say that that isn't evidence for God, or that it's not sufficient evidence of God, I have to know what you're thinking about in the first place. I have to know what it is that you think is evidence. So there's that burden of proof that Eric didn't provide. Here's what I think proves God, and then whatever that is. And I'd say, well, okay, let's look at whatever it is that you gave. But that wasn't done, so I can't do that. So He's saying, I'm not going to give you anything, but I'm going to ask you to prove that there isn't evidence. Haha. And, this is classical nonsense like we had way back in the day, shock of God running around saying, provide the sufficient evidence that atheism is true and justified and true or whatever, and it's like, no, it doesn't work like that. It's saying that, even if you did want to say there's no evidence of God, which is closer to what I might say, because I disagree with the philosopher and saying no evidence at all, because when I see the word evidence, I think, okay, you mean something by that. Because, like, the way that I use evidence is a certain pragmatic way, well, but other people don't. So I have to weigh in the factor that natural language has an effect here and say, well, they might mean something different by evidence. So, well, what evidence do they think for God? So what do they mean by that word? And maybe I would write it that way. I'd say it depends what somebody means by evidence. So maybe instead of saying there's no evidence of God, say that, you don't know, or you've heard the arguments, you've seen what's been presented, but that doesn't convince you or compel you. If you wanted to make some sort of argument that atheists should or shouldn't say X, Y, or Z, although I don't think that necessarily even trying to make that argument has any point to it at all, other than, it's like, well, try to get all atheists to, not do one thing. Yeah, it's like, yeah, good luck with that. Or try to get all atheists to do one thing. Yeah, good luck with that. Try to get all skeptics to do or not do one thing. Good luck with that. It's just like the only thing we agree on is that we don't believe in God. Then for the skeptics, well, the only thing we agree on is that we're skeptical of things, and we probably are skeptical of the fact that every other skeptic is skeptical of all the things, because they don't appear to be skeptical of the things that I'm skeptical of. So, I'm skeptical that they're a skeptic, maybe. So, of course, we're not going to agree on a wide variety of things. So trying to get us all to agree to the idea that we all say that there's no evidence of God, forget about it. No, we don't all say that. Maybe somebody does say that, and then if you're trying to get to that person, I don't think that this broad stroke argument that this philosopher is making would get to that person in the first place. But maybe it would. I don't know. You write stuff and you hope that it affects somebody, I suppose. And, reading through this, it's like, yeah, I get what he's saying. You got to be careful with what you say, with what you put out there for your position and against the position that you don't hold. And you also have to be careful that you don't find yourself in an intellectual bubble where everybody always agrees with you. You want to have people disagree with you. And I find that difficult, but necessary to think through these things better, to encounter people that don't agree, so I can say, okay, why do you believe this? Okay, I see, I understand. All right. I have considered those points, or maybe they're points I've never considered before. All right, so that's the tweet. Now that I'm done complaining about it, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we'll go ahead and look at the non-existent chat room and see if anyone's there to respond to before I end this thingy. Let's see. Satan apologist. Okay. Philosophical discussions are a waste of time. This tweet is a subtle troll on atheists. Even philosophically, their God needs special accommodations. Okay, well, but saying that philosophical discussions are a waste of time is a philosophy. So there's an internal problem with that idea. It's kind of like saying that some or all arguments are worthless. Well, if you say all arguments are worthless, then your statement is worthless because your statement is also an argument. And if you say some arguments are worthless, then your statement potentially becomes worthless because it might be an argument and be one of the arguments that's worthless. So rather than go to that extreme, you might want to say that philosophy, you know, doesn't necessarily have certain constraints that you would want it to have. And you would, you know, in what way does it waste time, and then what level, and who, you know, well, you know, why is it being a waste of time important? Like, well, building railroad kits is a waste of time. Yeah, well, sure, but it's somebody's hobby. They enjoy it. You know, I mean, it's not a waste of time. It's a way to spend time. You know, can you really waste, you know, you could go down that rabbit hole, which requires philosophy. Sure. But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't agree with that sentiment there, Satanist apologist, but to try to see where you're coming from on the idea that philosophical discussions are a waste of time. Perhaps you're trying to suggest that depending on what you're looking at, that trying to argue within the confines of philosophy might not be productive to convincing your opponent or the audience of a certain position. Now, that may or may not be true. It's hard to say. Again, you know, this philosopher wrote this in hopes that he would change people's minds. Now, I don't know what else he's written because I haven't read anything except for the thing that I read just now. So, did what he said change my mind? No, it didn't really change my mind. I've thought about those things to some degree, maybe not in the way that he framed them. And I've seen somebody make a post that I didn't agree with, or a video that I didn't agree with, or whatever. And I said, okay, well, here's why I don't agree with it. And I put that out there, and we can have a discussion about it, ideally. But we still have that discussion, and that requires some philosophy of some sort. It requires some sort of way of thinking about thinking, and a way of constraining our ideas that will get to the truth. So, you know, I've put out there many, many times, you know, I have 3 essential tenets of things that I require to think that something's true. Although maybe I could reduce it to 2, but it's been empirical evidence, repeatable test, and or a valid and sound argument. I could reduce that to the scientific method or valid argument, perhaps. But I try to make it more broad than that. But you know, again, and that's something that might be subject to revising on my own. That I need to think about that and think, okay, well, is there a better way to phrase this? Is there, you know, and that's why I say that there's a different way I could put it out there, and you know, because logic, whatever. Okay, well, so logic is a subset of philosophy, but it has rules and structures to it. So it might be something that you can utilize that's a better than just pure philosophy if you wanted to avoid that waste of time that you might be referring to, Satanist apologist. Okay, William. Hello, Dick Man. What happened to Quiet Atheist? That's a good question. Last I knew, when speaking to him on Facebook, he's still struggling to get places to where he needs to work. I think he got a job last I knew. He was seeing his kids, but there's still a lot of family life drama that doesn't sound too pleasant that he's encountering. It does seem like he's still hard up for money, although, you know, whether or not he wants or I'm sure he could use support financially from those who might want to, you know, help him out if they can. I can't do it. I don't have any money to help anyone with at this point. Things that, you know, came up in my life have prevented me from, you know, doing things like that. So, you know, he's doing okay. Could be doing better is what I would put that as far as I know. But if you're on Facebook, you can probably find him through there. I don't feel that I can share that information or anything. So that's what's happening with Quiet Atheist. Thanks for the question that had nothing to do with this topic, but that's okay. What other tweets can I respond to live? Come on. Let's see what. Come on. Oh, yeah. Hey, here's Satan apologist into Twitter. I was responding to S.J. Thompson. I always appreciate those who show up in my notification with kind words, interesting ideas and questions, or entertaining intellectual pursuits. Sadly, they are the exception. Well, I kind of agree with that. And then Satanist apologist. You got to keep in mind, Twitter is the last place in the world to have a conversation or discussion, limited in scope, and the trolls love Twitter. I agree with that, too. I agree with both people. Yeah, because it's hard, you have a limited tweet amount of words you can send out. Of course, you could just, attach a picture that has, however many words in it that you want to express, or you could, tweet a link or whatever, I guess. But yeah, I suppose there's better ways than Twitter. But I think Twitter is like, it's an open instant messenger system that everybody can read. It's like, I remember AOL Instant Messenger, which I guess is still around, but died out last I knew. But, where everyone can read your messages. So, yeah, you can send private messages, but typically you post a message and everybody can read it. So, you have to think about what it is that you're putting out there. Sometimes you don't, and you forget, you're like, yeah, whatever, everything sucks but me, Oh, right. That was something that everybody can read. Oops. Anyways, so yeah, sure, no problem. Glad to give out what info I know. As far as Satan, John Smith, he's doing better, but he's still recovery. I guess you're always in recovery from when you have a stroke. So I'm hoping that I'll be able to talk to him one-on-one. I don't think it will be put up on YouTube or anything like that, though. I don't know if he's even able to do that right now, like to talk out loud in a way that could be put on YouTube yet. But if he is, and if he's willing to, I'll make sure to get whatever he has to say out there. Even if he has to just type to me what it is he wants to put out, and I'll like read it for him or something. Because his ideas were really great, and I really miss that guy on YouTube. And in general, I don't just mean on YouTube. I mean, miss that his participation is missing because of the universe deciding that he would get a stroke, although that's the wrong way to think about that. But yeah, well, I've seriously come to hate social media and the like. Yeah, I understand that. I mean, it's weird how it's developing, and what people are doing with it, and how people are responding to it. And there was this series that I just finished watching. It was only one season, called The Crossing. And there was a little minor commentary in one of the episodes where the person has come from the future, and the future is this war-torn crime. But of course, they all look perfectly fine. None of them have any battle scars or anything. They're all mentally pretty stable. Yeah, sure. You guys are from a wartime. Yeah. But anyways, you have to suspend your disbelief. It's a character study, I guess. And anyway, so he says, well, there's so much to see here. And talking about the present, all this wonderful things that he doesn't have where he came from. And he's like, but everybody is looking at their phones. And it's like, yeah, that's a good little commentary. It's kind of like what Star Trek might do, where they go to the alien planet and it's beautiful and all the aliens are looking at some sort of device rather than at each other. So, well, yeah, we lost something maybe, and we gained something. So, there will be, I think, communities that decide organically to move away from cell phones and instead decide to, interact with each other on a human to human basis, not on a screen to human basis. But whether that will extend to everybody or not, I don't know. It's hard to say. It's good to get away from it every now and again, I think. Yeah, it was only one season. They canceled it, which is unfortunate because I was like, I want it. No, you just were getting good. No, why? Well, what can you do? Yeah, it was decent. I mean, I thought it was pretty good. I mean, I kind of saw where it was going. It kind of put itself in the trap of, the future now is you can't change the future because all these people are from the future. So you can't do what they're trying to do. Everything that they're trying to do is going to make this future actually happen, basically. So, you don't have a lot of wiggle room with that to play with unless you decide that causality isn't a thing, maybe. And say, well, the universe doesn't care about paradox. You could do that, I suppose, which would be interesting as a time travel series. Like, the guy goes back in time, kills his grandfather, and is like, well, I'm still here. What happened? So he decides to watch how it plays out. Well, obviously his dad can't be born, so he watches that happen. He watches that his dad doesn't get born, and he watches that he doesn't get born, and he still exists, and he's like, this doesn't make any sense. That would be an interesting little movie or something, And it's like, well, the universe just doesn't care about causality, I guess, But at any rate, so unfinished storylines are annoying. Yeah, I agree. But sometimes that happens. Yeah. Sometimes a book series can do that too. Like, I was reading The World of Tears, and like the first 3 books are absolutely amazing. The next book, and I was like, this got to be from a different author because the tone was different. Everything in the book was totally different. And I was just like, I don't like this book. This book sucks. I can't get through it. And so it's like, I don't want to read the rest of the series. There's like 2 more books. And I don't want to read it because this one sucks so badly. I don't want to know what happens now. I don't care. You ruined it. Everything changed. It's like, what did you do? So, yeah. Sometimes that happens. What can you do? I suppose we could even look at that in a human way, in that, when somebody walks off the mortal coil, we get really upset because it's like, well, their story wasn't done yet. How dare the universe decide that their story was done? It was just getting interesting. So that is maybe why we, one of many reasons why it's mortality sucks. So there you go. There's some deep thoughts. Any more Twitter I can react to live? What could possibly go wrong? I mean, just reacting to stuff live. Like I saw this one person had quit YouTube and then they decided to upload content. There you go. That's okay. Well, I guess they didn't quit then. I don't know. That's something to respond to. Maybe. Nah, I don't. That's not that interesting to respond to. Yeah. Let's see what Trump's tweeting. I don't care. It doesn't matter. Marshmallow revealed his true face. Woohoo! I don't care who that is. I don't know who he revealed himself to be, so it doesn't matter to me. Somebody else it matters to, but not me. Evolutionists can't answer. Yes, of course. There's always questions like that of course can be answered. Flat Earth. Yeah, it's a flat Earth again. Just why? I've learned a lot from the flat Earth response videos, like about how we know the Earth isn't flat, and also what's really interesting to me is always like when they tell you like, here's what would happen if the Earth was really flat. Like, here's how that would work. Like, here's what we would observe happening. And like, if you made the sun into the spotlight that they're talking about, here's what we would observe from that happening. and how even when you give them everything that they're asking for, that the model still doesn't align, and that you still need magic to explain how things work. Like, even if it's just a spotlight and there's no gravity because the Earth is constantly moving because reasons, and then the spotlight is also moving because it's stuck in the sky dome thingy, and I guess God's controlling it all, but then why wouldn't God just make gravity? Why would he have to keep moving the Earth? I don't know. Maybe God's really bored, so he just has to move the Earth constantly up to create a simulation of gravity. And since God is infinitely big, it can do that since it has an infinitely big hand to lift it up with. But that's the wrong way to think about God, because God doesn't really have a hand, but it's just kind of moving it. So don't think about that, because that doesn't make sense. But at any rate, even when you give all of that except for the magic stuff, it doesn't work. And I find that interesting too. It's like, here's, like they did. I want somebody to do. I think somebody has done like a Minecraft thing where the Minecraft world would be like super big compared to it's like way bigger than any planet in our system, because like if you take Steve's height, which is like 5 foot, whatever, and then you take the chunk of dirt that's next to him based on its volume, and then however many cubes that a Minecraft world can have maximum, because there's a world border that you can actually get to in Minecraft. And if you go outside that border, your character eventually dies. But if you prevent your character from dying, then eventually the world starts to crumble, because the code doesn't know how to formulate more chunks. It only knows how to formulate the chunks within the borders, which is still a massive amount of chunks, a massive amount of blocks. So if we took that and we made it into a block world, that it would be ginormously huge. But anyway, so if the world was a cube and you had a sun, what would the Minecraft world look like? And I don't know if anyone's done that model yet or not, but that would be interesting to find out for me at any rate. What other things on? This horrible person, Dan Green, has posted this responding to a tweet live. What could possibly go wrong? What kind of stupid thing is he posting about? Let's see what that is. Okay, so he starts off the live stream by complaining about this tweet on Twitter, and then that's gonna hit infinite loop. I'm not gonna read that comment out loud, Satanist apologist. Although I want to, but I won't do it. Okay, well, thanks for listening. Burden of proof still on the person that made the claim. That's still how that works. No matter what people want to change that to, we need evidence and we need science to know that something is a thing. And if we don't have those things, then at least we need a logical argument. And if we don't have any of that, well, I suggest we stay skeptical, which doesn't mean that any of that's wrong. It just means we doubt things until better proof is provided, or a better argument is given, or something of that nature. Although you could decide to look into it on your own if you felt like doing so. It's just that logic basically says you don't have to do that. Okay. Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye. 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 Press a button.